Welcome back as we continue to discuss William Shakespeare's play Hamlet. In our first video, we began with the opening lines, and I mentioned a couple of key ideas or themes that we might want to consider throughout our study together. Now we continue where we left off in Act 1, Scene 1, with Bernardo and Francisco on the watch, on the battlements of Elsinore. And already we begin with the key question of this opening act, and one that introduces the entire interrogative mood of the play, which is the question of who's there. It's the opening question of the play. This is a play filled with questions. Hamlet himself asks hundreds of them. Somebody once remarked that it's over 500 questions that Hamlet asks throughout the course of the play. But this opening question, as serving as the opening line, presents one of the key themes in Hamlet, which is the nature of epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. How do we know what we claim to know? How do we know the things that we claim to be true? And so who's there as the question of identity, the question of establishing reality. Who is this that I see before me? Who is this with whom I'm speaking? How do I know that this person I'm speaking to is who they claim to be? That epistemological dilemma is going to serve a real foundation here for Hamlet, especially as we have the introduction of this ghost, where who this ghost is, what this ghost is, what it is foretelling, becomes the key dilemma for Hamlet as he contemplates the message the ghost gives him. The question of justice, the question of revenge, the question of his father's death. Is it a murder? Is this a ghost that I can trust? Is this a ghost that, though he looks like my dead father, is he actually the ghost of my dead father? Or is he a goblin damned? Is he a demon assuming a certain shape to entice me to my own destruction? That same question will serve Hamlet's doubts about Claudius's character, that one may smile and be a villain. And so the question of reality, which is the issue of ontology, and how we know that reality, the question of epistemology, is going to play a main role here, particularly with the introduction of Horatio into the narrative. Horatio, in this opening scene, seems to have his own crisis of belief at work, where his epistemology seems to be restricted to the merely physical, the merely natural world, and therefore any gossip of a ghost is gossip that he is going to dismiss outright. And yet, Horatio is about to see this ghost with his own eyes. And so how the physical world and the metaphysical realm might interrelate, might be connected, how the metaphysical is going to intrude into the physical. We have this supernatural ghost intruding into the natural world and demanding to be believed, that Horatio sees it with his eyes, and Hamlet, by the end of the act, will hear the ghost speak with his own ears. And of course, for the reader, for the audience who's watching all of this happen, the ultimate irony behind all of this is that this is a play. So we don't quite know how much of this is merely theatrical, merely the devices of the stage, or how much of this is expected to be believed as reflecting the real. That adds an element of doubt and suspicion to us as we watch the play. So let's watch how these ideas play out in the following lines. Bernardo, well, good night. If you do meet Horatio and Marcellus, the rivals of my watch, bid them make haste. Enter Horatio and Marcellus. I think I hear them. Stand ho, who's there? So there's our second instance of our key question. Again, the cover of night being an excellent setting choice of Shakespeare's to have this opening scene. That it creates the mood of the play where anyone could appear on the scene and become a mystery. Who's there? Who is this that is in front of me? Friends to this ground. Horatio says, and liegemen to the Dane, pledges of loyalty. Give you good night. Go farewell, honest soldier, who hath relieved you? Bernardo has my place, give you good night. Exit Francisco. Holla, Bernardo, say, what, is Horatio there? There's another question. Notice just the onslaught of questions here. Questions related to the nature of things. Who is this? Is this who I think it is? They might seem subtle now, just mere naming and self-identifying, but as we'll see, they become the cornerstone of the essential questions of the play. To be or not to be, that is the question, is itself an ontological dilemma. To be, to exist, or not to exist? That is the question. So Bernardo asks if Horatio's there. Horatio gives a pretty cryptic reply. A piece of him. So here we have a hint at the possible fragmentation of the self. That perhaps Horatio is a divided man. And we'll get this too, of course, with the division within his own mind of what he believes. Is reality relegated to the physical world? Or is there a metaphysical world? Is this a natural world only? Or is there a supernatural? Is this the world of reason alone? Or is this a world which requires faith? We'll see this with Hamlet's statement to Horatio later in the opening act, where he says, there are more things in heaven and on earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. There are more things in heaven and on earth, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Horatio will get chided in just a little bit by the statement that the ghost that they have all just witnessed is more than fantasy. There's more going on than what we can merely see or hear or touch. And this question of epistemology is going to play a major factor, not only in Shakespeare's time, but in the generations that follow Shakespeare, with Descartes' view of rationalism, that I think, therefore I am. We'll have John Locke's philosophy of empiricism, that which I can see, that which I can sense and perceive is what is real. These are the foundations of the Enlightenment, the foundations of the scientific method. That which we can measure, that which we can perceive with our senses, those are the things that are real. Anything that requires more than that is the stuff of mere religion. And so this is a pivotal dilemma that Horatio is being put to. And I would argue it's the human dilemma that all of us must evaluate. Is our world, is reality, that which is merely available to our senses and to our perceptions? Or is there reality that transcends the merely physical or the merely natural? This is the question that the ghost presents. Perhaps my philosophy must bend and adapt to account for the metaphysical, and not the other way around. So Horatio says a piece of him is here, that he is not a whole man, that his mind, his heart, his body, his soul, they are not integrated around a central core belief, that a piece of him is here, implying that a piece of him is not. And therefore he is a man of skepticism, a man of doubting. Welcome, Horatio. Welcome, good Marcellus. What, has this thing appeared again tonight? I have seen nothing. Notice that play on words, thing and no thing. That is there a thing here? Is there a ghost? Is this ghost that we've seen a thing? Is it real? Or is it no thing? And how would we know? How would we know whether this ghost is a thing or nothing? How do we know whether it's real or unreal? Our senses? Our faith? Our belief? Its appearance to our perceptions? This goes back to the question of epistemology. How would we know what we claim to be so? Because we've seen it? Because we've touched it? Or more than that, because we believe it? It has been revealed to us? This opens the way for many philosophical, theological questions to emerge. Horatio says 'tis but our fantasy. That it's our imagination, it's our mind's playing tricks on us, and therefore it is nothing. It is not a thing. Horatio says, "'Tis but our fantasy, and will not let belief take hold of him." Now this sentence is revealing regarding Horatio's skepticism and one of the possible reasons he is so skeptical. Horatio says it is but our fantasy. There is no way this ghost is a thing that has appeared. It is nothing. It is fantasy. Why else might Horatio say it's but our fantasy? And Horatio will not let belief take hold of him. Now notice the personification of belief here as something which can take hold of a man. Marcellus places Horatio as the object of this prepositional phrase. Horatio is objectified here, and belief is the subject of this little clause. Belief, personified, can take hold or grasp or grip a man. Notice how that puts the idea of believing something as an action that requires a relinquishing of control. Belief takes hold of somebody. And that can be a frightening idea, especially for Horatio here, that if I just choose to believe it without understanding it, without having seen it, that's an epistemology where my reason, my control, my understanding is backgrounded, and belief is the one that takes hold. And so that formulation tells us much of what, at least in Marcellus's view, Horatio might find belief versus rational knowledge or empirical knowledge. That I believe because it is understandable, or I believe because it is perceptible. I've touched it and measured it and tasted it and heard it. Belief in regards to faith, belief in regards to what Augustine would consider that knowledge is only that which God has revealed man to know. All knowledge is revelation. And therefore, in order to know, you must believe. That might be what frightens Horatio, this metaphysical leap into the world of faith and into the world of religious belief in the supernatural. And so he dismisses it as mere fantasy, and he will not let belief take hold of him, touching this dreaded sight twice seen of us. Therefore I've entreated him along with us to watch the minutes of this night, that if again this apparition come, he may approve our eyes and speak to it. Now notice these points I've circled, that the epistemological emphasis here is on the senses. Horatio says, "'Tis but our fantasy, will not let belief take hold of him, touching a sight seen of us. I've entreated him along with us to watch the minutes of this night, that again if this apparition come," is it an apparition? Is it a fantasy? Is it a hallucination, or is it a thing? "If again this apparition come, he may approve our eyes," right? He may confirm its presence by seeing it, and speak to it, presumably to be able to hear it in response. So all the emphasis here is on the knowledge of the senses, touching, seeing, speaking to it, hearing it respond. So again, this is a battle of epistemologies. It's a battle of truth claims. Is this ghost, is the metaphysical realm, the transcendent world of spiritual reality, is it true or is it false? If it is true, how would we know? If it is false, how would we know? And so the philosophical background of this whole play is opening up before our very eyes. Horatio dismisses it. Tush, tush, it will not appear. It will not appear. This fantasy, this thing, it won't appear. Sit down a while and let us once again assail your ears that are so fortified against our story. You see that? Here's Horatio's presupposition. His ears are already fortified against their story of what they have seen. That his philosophy, his aversion to what he dismisses as fantasy, his distance away from any metaphysical reality, is one that he has committed himself to full sail. His ears are fortified against their story. He will not acknowledge or listen to or admit as a possibility their testimony to what they've witnessed. Until now, Horatio says, well, sit we down, and let us hear Bernardo speak of this. So he's willing to hear it. Bernardo claims even if he's going to hear it, his ears are fortified against believing it, which we already know. He will not let belief take hold of him. He is a skeptic to the end, it seems. He doubts it. Bernardo begins the exposition. Let's inform our audience of the history of this ghost. Last night of all, when yon same star that's westward from the pole had made his course to illumine that part of heaven where now it burns, Marcellus and myself, the bell then beating one, enter ghost. Now notice this choice of Shakespeare's. Here we have the metaphysical, the supernatural, breaking into the physical. The supernatural intrudes into the natural, interrupting the very story of the exposition. Shakespeare seems to be replying to or tagging something onto Horatio's skepticism that even the mind that is most closed off to the possibility of a spiritual reality, supernatural realms, the ghost, the afterlife, the beyond, God, faith, heaven, even those ears that are so fortified against that story cannot stop the metaphysical from breaking in. What if this is a world where the supernatural just intrudes into the natural? What if this is a world where God breaks in? What would that do to our epistemology? What would that do to our theology? What if we are people who must let belief take hold of us, and that we are not so arrogant and full of knowledge as we presume? The possibility of a metaphysical world certainly does humble us. They respond to this reality, all of them, Horatio included. Peace, break thee off, look where it comes again. It continues to break in. Remember, this is something that they have seen several nights, and now he has appeared again. In the same figure like the king that's dead. Thou art a scholar, speak to it, Horatio. Horatio knows Latin, the language that would be used to communicate with the dead. Looks he not like the king? Now notice this repeated phrase. Mark it, Horatio. Mark it. This is important because remember, Horatio has not been marking it. Tush, tush, 'twill not appear. Right? He's been dismissing it. He's been avoiding it. Now Bernardo says, mark it, observe it, notice it. You must do something with this information. Right? You can no longer avoid it. It is here in our world. It is before our very eyes. It has revealed itself to us. You must mark it. Now you can continue to try to ignore it. You can craft any sort of response to it, but you can no longer just sidestep it. You must do something with it. Mark it, Horatio. Most like. It does look like the king that's dead. Remember, this is information that frustrates Horatio's worldview. How not only is it that there's this ghost that appears before me, but it's a ghost that appears in the likeness of the king that just died. What might that mean? What does all of this portend? How do I categorize this data that your brain is overwhelmed with new information that it doesn't have a philosophical category for in your worldview? So either you just continue to try to dismiss it, or you must adapt the categories of your worldview to allow for this new event, to allow for this revelation. Most like it harrows me with fear and wonder. Horatio is harrowed. You'll notice here in this footnote, he is cut to the very quick of his being with fear and wonder, that his response is even childlike. That his great skeptical dismissal of this mere ghost, almost with a haughty sense of authority and pride, tush, tush, it will not appear. This is nothing more than fantasy. All of the props and the crutches of his philosophy have been knocked out from under him, and now he's reduced back to this point of humility. It reminds me of Socrates' great statement that wisdom begins in wonder. So now Horatio is in position to gain wisdom, to have his own ideological assumptions frustrated and combated by this confrontation with the ghost. It would be spoke to. Speak to it, Horatio. What art thou? So there's our question again. Who's there? What is there? Now notice it's a bit different. Instead of saying who's there or what is there, that something is there is something Horatio grants now. So now the it has become a thou. Something personal, something that can be addressed in conversation. He speaks directly not about it, but to it. What art thou that usurps this time of night? Now notice Horatio's diction here of using the word usurping. That is the supernatural usurping, breaking into? Is it trespassing into Horatio's view of the physical world or the natural world? What art thou? Unfold yourself, right? That phrase from earlier. Reveal what you truly are. What art thou that usurps this time of night, together with that fair and warlike form, that he looks like the king, in which the majesty of buried Denmark did sometimes march? By heaven I charge thee, speak. Notice that standard of authority. Now that might just be a colloquialism of the time to swear by heaven or so, but it is interesting that Horatio, who had dismissed the heaven, the spiritual, the metaphysical, is now charging by it. By heaven I charge thee, speak. It is offended. See, it stalks away. Stay, speak, speak. I charge thee, speak. And yet the ghost will not speak. So not only is this some spiritually significant supernatural figure who has come to Denmark for some, they think, foreboding reason, but it's a ghost that cannot be handled, a ghost that cannot be controlled. That in the dynamic between Horatio and the ghost, all of Horatio's authority, I charge thee, speak, I command thee to speak, the ghost does not obey. So you can see why this is something that Horatio might not have wanted to admit. What if there are forces beyond our control and beyond our ability to understand? What if, for example, there is a God that we cannot fully comprehend or control? Would that not bring about a sense of humility, a sense of a loss of authority or autonomy? Well, yes. And so the theological implications of this ghost, much less the philosophical and epistemological implications, are quite striking. That Horatio has just been confronted with a spiritual reality that will not be commanded, one that has authority over Horatio, and will not be neatly comprehended. The idea of this ghost, like the idea of God, is one that does not just fit neatly and politely in some compartment of our understanding, but rather God would be that which is transcendent beyond all categories, which would bring about fear and wonder. 'Tis gone and will not answer. How now, Horatio? You tremble and look pale. Is not this something more than fantasy? Now notice this. Horatio's just had an encounter with the supernatural. He's just had an encounter with the spiritual realm through this ghost and what all it represents. And Bernardo chides him, "Well, Horatio, Mr. Philosophy, the one who had his ontology and epistemology watertight, and therefore doubted our story because it did not accord with what he already believed. He fortified his ears against our story. Well, Horatio, you tremble and look pale." These are the conventional responses to confronting the supernatural, an angel, the manifestation of God's presence. You think of Moses in the Old Testament and so on, that those who fall to their face prostrate before the very face of God, the coram Deo, the face of God. Horatio's experiencing something similar. You tremble and look pale. Is not this something more than fantasy? Must we admit now that perhaps there are realities beyond that which we can readily perceive and logically deduce and rationally explain? The indefinite pronoun here, it's something. We don't know what this ghost is. What art thou? The ghost doesn't respond yet, but that it has been revealed to us is certain. What it is, why it is, who it is, these are questions that remain. These are mysteries. But that it is no longer a mystery. And so our response to this, just thinking as readers and as audience members, is to consider our own worldviews, to consider our own ideological assumptions. What are our ontological assumptions about reality? What are our epistemological assumptions about how we know the nature of that reality? And might we also just be humbled to acknowledge that the metaphysical realm is something more than mere fantasy?